a canned politician that's going to give the same state answers over and over again.
We are joining live. We are joining in studio here. We're joining live.
Started to call this Obamacare Light.
Sean
President Trump
Spicer
has promised to fully
grilling
repeal Obamacare, but this bill leaves a lot of the structure of Obamacare intact.
I'm gonna have some
This is the
commentary
policy that
to kind of
passes.
show,
Is President
this
Trump
whole
confident in the
process,
future he
what's
can
going on.
say that he fully
So we're
repealed
Go to
Obamacare?
that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I mean, the first half of the bill that we put forward repeals it. There are three things. I mean, each phase that we've talked about, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, there's a repeal and replace aspect in each one. But Republicans and conservatives have been talking about added competition and driving costs down for decades now. Selling across state lines, small business pooling, all of those things have been part of conservative plans for a long time. And I think instilling that competition in it, allowing more access. I mean, I think there's a big difference. There is no, we have, for the longest time, if you're a conservative, I mean, you think about this right now, that you have anyone who has an employer-based, their job comes from an employer that gives them health care. They're getting a subsidy. They're getting a credit. They don't pay taxes on their health care, and their employer doesn't either. That's a huge disadvantage to anyone who's a sole proprietor or owns a small business. And so, frankly, to allow the playing field to be leveled and allow small businesses, which are frankly the job creators in this country, to allow entrepreneurs and self-starters to get the same tax treatment that a Fortune 500 company gets you, is a very conservative principle. And again, I think, look, one of the things that's important, Sarah, is for all of the people who have concerns about this, especially on the right, look at the size. This is the Democrats. This is us. There is, I mean, you can't get any clearer in terms of this is government, this is not. And I think that part of the reason the visual is important is that when you actually look at the difference, you realize this is what big government does. It crowds out competition, it drives up prices, it stifles entrepreneurship and innovation, doctors leaving the markets, more and more people not taking Medicaid or TRICARE. That should concern people. When you've got veterans that can't, because most of the time Medicaid and TRICARE are tied together. So when you have those systems not accepted by doctors, that means the lowest of the people on the low income scale and people who have served our country have fewer and fewer choices. That alone should be a problem and concerning for many people. But the premium spikes are another problem because, again, even if you're in the exchange, now you're seeing over and over again that happen. You're also seeing young people decide that they'd rather just pay a penalty because the cost of those basic programs is out of reach for a lot of young people who are just entering the job market. But again, I think the greatest illustration of the differences in the approaches is that size. Our bill, which is a tenth of the size, does repeal and replace in what their bill just did in massive government bureaucracy. And that is a big difference. Jim.
Just want to ask you, I mean, you had the Health and Human Services Secretary out here. You just talked about this is the Republican bill, this is the Democrat bill. Is that the president's bill? Is that his health care bill?
That is a bill that we have worked with Congress. We feel very good about where it is. We are looking forward, as I mentioned earlier, the president's meeting with the whip team to encourage them to support it and to build it out. I don't think, and I'm not trying to be cute here, but I think it's not his bill or their bill. It's a bill that we have worked on with them together. We're very proud of where it stands now. The big difference, Jim, is that unlike before, as I mentioned, when the Democrats jammed it down people's throat and said, waited to get that 60th vote before with Senator Kennedy still around, and then basically said, literally, you will have to wait and see what it looks like before we passed it. We not only posted it out there for everybody to look at, but by sending it through regular order, not just putting up for a House vote, but sending it through the committee process, allows Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike to offer up amendments and suggestions, and the House will work its will. Now, we will continue to give guidance and thoughts and suggestions, but I think the president's core principles are what's going to guide us as we head through the Hill and then over the House and then to the Senate.
And just one quick follow-up on Jonathan Karl's question, because the president made a very serious allegation over the weekend, and I think we would all be remiss if we went through this briefing and not tried to get you on camera to at least offer us some evidence. Where is the evidence? Where is the proof that President Obama bugged President Trump?
Well, I answered this question yesterday on camera on your air. So just so we're clear, I know this is now will be twice. But I think I made it clear yesterday.
But since yesterday,
Nothing
is
has
there any new
changed.
proof? Is
No,
there any
and
new
it's not a question of new proof or less proof or whatever. It's the answer is the same, and I think that that there is a concern about what happened in the 2016 election. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees have the staff and the capabilities and the processes in place to look at this in a way that's objective, and that's where it should be done. And frankly, if you've seen the response from, especially on the House side, but as well as the Senate, they welcome this. And so let's let the Senate do their job, and the House, Intelligence Committees, and then report back to the American people.
Yeah. Will the president withdraw the accusation? Does he have any?
Why would he withdraw it until until it's adjudicated? That's what we're asking. Is for them to look at this and see if there is.
No regrets from him
no,
about
it's not.
raising this accusation.
Absolutely not. And I think that what he wants them to do is to look into wiretapping, other surveillance, and again, as I mentioned before, the other leaks that are threatening our national security. You're seeing the leaks happen over and over again that come out throughout the administration, throughout government, that undermine national security. And I think the appropriate thing to do is to ask the House and the Senate to look into it. Glenn Thrush.
Sean, so to follow up on the follow-up, in terms of, you were given an opportunity on air to say whether or not the president still supported Director Comey. Does the president support Director Comey? And then a quick follow-up.
I have no reason to believe he doesn't. He has not suggested that to me. So now to the non-follow-up to the...
Have you seen any evidence yourself? Has the evidence been shared with you or other members, senior members of the president's staff, as to why he made this particular accusation?
As far as me, no, I'm not in a position that would be regularly part of my daily duties for the president to sit down and go through that. That's probably a level above my pay grade. But as I've mentioned, I think the president believes that the appropriate place for this to be adjudicated is for the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to have the clearances, the staff, the processes to go through this, look at it, and report back. Yeah.
Did he share it with?
I'm not going to get it. Look, as the president made very clear, Glenn, I'm not going to. As the president said in the statement that he issued on Sunday, we're not going to have further comment on this until this matter is resolved. Yes.
Two quick questions. So just to follow up on the follow-up. So does the White House feel that it's appropriate? You say that you want it to be adjudicated by the congressional committees,
right.
But the president made declarative statements
right.
on Twitter. So I guess is the White House position that the president can make declarative statements about a former president basically committing a crime, and then the congressional committee should look into that and basically prove it? I mean,
well, it's not a question. No, but I would take issue with. It's not a question of prove it. I think, as I said.
Yeah, let's see. Did the former president ever accuse?
That it's not a question of prove
the
it.
former president
they have the resources,
Obama ever
and the clearances,
accuse
and the staff.
Anyone else of committing a crime without
fully
proving
and
it?
Thoroughly and comprehensively investigate this, and then issue a report as to what their findings are.
So, but President Trump's Twitter statement shouldn't be taken at face value about what.
Sure, it should. Of course, I mean, what? No, there's nothing. As I mentioned to Jim, it's not that he's walking anything back or regretting. He's just saying that they have the appropriate venue and capabilities to review this. Margaret, I'm sorry.
On the Obamacare replacement, so you've said that it'll be in phases and that you're going to need additional legislation. So just to clarify, are the cost savings that you guys are projecting, right, is that dependent on phase 3 on the national competition plan? Because
yeah, well, it's not dependent. I think that in order to see it fully come to fruition, yeah, you have to see all parts of it. But the way that it was passed doesn't allow for the way that it was passed is almost the same way that we're going through this now, which is they passed certain things, then the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the time was granted significant regulatory authority that allowed her to do certain things at the time to implement pieces of Obamacare that we now have to act backwards and go almost in the same steps to do what they did to lay it out. We've got to repeal it, and then we've got to replace it with the plan that's going to do the same. Certain things can be done in the same way and certain things can't. It literally depends on how that was done. John Frederick.
Sean, in the replacement plan, it says that the states that accepted the Medicare expansion money would continue to be funded. So what is the message you have to Republican state legislators that thought they were fiscally responsible in rejecting Medicaid expansion in their states, and now they didn't get the federal dollars on either end. What is your
Well, I think
response?
I think what we need to do is to make sure, as the president said in his statements, as Secretary Price did, we've got to make sure that we continue to protect people through this transition process. Let the bill work its way. But this is the first time, as we address the Medicaid portion of this, this is probably the first time that we've really addressed an entitlement aspect of something in almost 30 years. So
Yeah.
I think we've got to let this piece of it work its way through the House. But there is, remember,
They
one of
have
the things that
a
happened
mess
through the
on their
Medicaid
hands.
expansion was the goal has always been a
Right
Medicaid
now,
to
there
help
is a
people,
huge issue
who were
with
disabled or poor or
the
met a
whole-
specific number of criteria.
they have
For the
to
first time,
unravel
Obamacare,
a tentacled
we expanded Obamacare,
monster.
or the Obama administration
Huge
did, rather,
monster.
to able-bodied individuals
Monster.
that, in a way that had never been done before, and it was not a specific class. That's led largely to the ballooning cost. I think a lot of the reforms that will be contained in this bill will address that, but I think we've got to let it work its will through the process. Alexis.
I want to ask you two communications questions on two
good.
topics. Because the president gave himself a middling grade on communication, let me ask you about the experience that the previous administration had when Obamacare was going through its own phases. President Obama said that the opposition to the legislation was able to seize the opportunity while it was being legislated to create public perceptions about what was in the legislation. So my question is on ACA. What is the president going to do to improve his communications, to be out there explaining what is in the bill, to work with lawmakers? That's the first question, and then I'll ask you the next one.
Okay, thank you. So on the first one, as I mentioned, he's had and continues to have significant outreach to members of Congress. He's talked to health insurers. I mean, I think we've read out a lot of the activities the last couple of weeks, and literally in just within an hour, he's going to sit down with the House Deputy Whip team to talk about the legislative piece of this in the House. So this is going to be a very aggressive, laser-like focus of this administration over the next month or two to get this thing through the House and then moved over to the Senate. But there's a big difference, Alexis. What we're doing is vastly different. They were expanding government, promising people something, and I think what's happened is there was a lot of difference with how the approach is happening. Right now, the American people, no matter where you are, you understand the state of your health care, the costs that you're seeing and the lack of choice that you've now been presented with. And in many cases, you realize that when you're going to see the doctor or loved ones going to see a doctor, that they're not either able to get in, they're not taking the Medicare or the exchange insurance that they got. The costs are going out of control. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that Dr. Price mentioned that is so apropos of this is having a card does not mean you have insurance. It's like handing someone a blank check. It doesn't mean that you have money. It means you have a check. And I think what we've seen over the last few years with Obamacare is you can have an insurance card, but that doesn't mean someone's going to take it. And it sure doesn't mean that it's going to be affordable. And there's a big difference between having a card and having health care that's affordable. And that's the difference that we're trying to solve right now. And I think, so when it comes to communication, I think one of the things that's really helpful is that part of the sell is done for us. The American people understand the state of their health care. They understand how much they're paying for. They've gone to see a doctor or gone to a hospital or had a notice from their carrier saying, we are no longer part of this. Or their employer says, hey, whatever your particular carrier is, is no longer available.
I
We're
am not
switching you
convinced
into this.
this is going to be a
And
better
so
deal.
for so many Americans, healthcare is a very, very real part of their
Yeah,
of their
it
daily
is a very, very
experience
real part,
because they're
and
caring
I'm
for
afraid,
themselves, or dealing with an ailment, or dealing with children, or
their
a loved one, or
attempts
someone
to
else in their
fix
family.
this may
When there's-
not be may have lost our stream. There's another network I could probably plug into to get this, but oh, maybe it's coming back. Yeah, I'll just take a moment to talk about that. I don't know how many of you had a chance to review what has happened with the bill that they're proposing, which they're supposed to vote on, I believe tomorrow. It's a little bit unnerving that they are basically looking at, sorry, I need to make some adjustments here. That they're making some changes, that they're not being methodical about it. I think they're trying to roll out too much too fast, and that's concerning me. I know that the entire bill, I think what they need to do is take a multiple approach to this. They've got time. They have, basically, they should have time with the Congress that's there now. If they do things properly, they can repeal parts of the bill, dismantle some things. And here's what gets me, and I don't understand who started this stuck the word replace into the mandate that people were trying to give them. Repealing Obamacare is kind of where most of America, at least on the right, the conservatives, and most of America actually wanted Obamacare repealed. And somebody injected into that repeal and replace. And my guess is it was the rhinos, the GOP, the big government people on the right, conservatives in name only, that started this mentality of repeal and replace. There are some things in Obamacare that are not necessarily bad. And of course, the one thing I haven't heard anything about, and I don't know if it's in the bill, I haven't had a chance to review that much of it, with regard to student loans. Is the government and the IRS still going to be in charge of all student loans? That was part of something that was thrown in at the last minute. They were just basically chucking everything in the can that they could possibly do.
They recognize that those people, as I've said over and over again here, it's if we do nothing, they're going to be in a very, very worse scenario than they are now. More and more people, if you're on Medicaid,
that's true,
which serves so many low-income Americans, as I mentioned, they have a card, and that card does not allow them to go to doctor after doctor or saying we're not going to take Medicaid or TRICARE anymore. So I would ask those senators, what are you doing to help us work on a bill that will get them insured again? Because for too many Americans, they've got a card, but they don't have insurance. And I think that's a very, very big thing, to a distinction to make. They're the ones who have the problem right now. They've got a Medicaid card and nowhere to go. And what we need to do is to make sure that low-income Americans, veterans, small business owners, individuals who desperately need health care have options and affordability.
One other piece of this. You can bring down the cost of the insurance itself through new efficiencies in the system selling across state lines, but the biggest driver of the increase in health insurance cost is the skyrocketing cost of medicine.
Right.
What in this overall plan do you propose to do to either cap the rise or even bring it down?
Well, I think the Secretary mentioned this, but I mean the cost of prescription drugs is no, it's not. It's a big factor. I think that
when you're paying $50,000 out of pocket to get a stent,
right?
I mean,
but again, what is the biggest thing missing?
But it's getting out of control. So
fair enough. But
drugs is one part of it.
No. But okay, when you talk about procedures or drugs, the biggest thing that's missing in this whole equation is competition. There's no. I mean, we're down to one plan. In many places, there's nothing for these places to compete.
There's competition between hospitals.
No, there's. I mean, that's fine. But if they know they're going to get the same reimbursement rate, if they know that there's no other options, that plans aren't trying to get people, then that's a big difference.
Now,
right now, there's a lack of competition.
That is all
in the
theory.
industry, and I think one
it's
of the presidents.
Plausible,
I get,
and it's
it
good
may be
theory.
One part
it's
of that.
still theory.
But you're
and
right. That all over medicine,
will take a little
procedures
while to
and such.
get it in
There's
place.
a reason he met with drug executives.
Competition will not
those
be
costs
a
down.
silver bullet overnight.
There's a multifaceted approach.
It's going to take some
How
time
do we instill
for competition
How
to
do we
develop
drive down
marketing,
costs?
all those
But you're
things.
right. We've got to do more to get the cost.
Even if they're chomping at the bit and ready to go with it,
procedures,
it's going to take
allow
some
additional
time.
options.
In the
Everything
meantime,
it's the same way that
6
again,
months
think
is a
about
long time
your
when you're waiting on
insurance,
treatment that may
right? One of
make
the
a
things that
difference
was driving
between life
up
and
costs in the past was people were exercising the option of going to an emergency room over and over again for their primary care. And what happened is that you saw all of these, quote unquote clinics pop up from around, and insurance carriers actually made it cheaper in terms of copays to go see that than an emergency room driving people to somewhere that didn't continue to drive up costs, clog insurance. That competition alone starts saving the plans money and helping to keep costs down. We've got to instill more aspects of competition in medicine. Jennifer.
Can you give us an update on the effort to roll back regulations? Have the regulatory reform task forces identified any regulations to roll back, and have any actually been repealed?
I think that they have had their work cut out for them. They've started. As the president has met with different industries and companies, corporations, associations, that is a constant subject of discussion, which is those regulatory aspects of our economy that are keeping companies from growing, expanding, and hiring. And so I know that the domestic policy team and others have been working on that. And if I can get further updates on specific legislation, or excuse me, specific regulatory action, I'll get back to you. Hallie.
Thank you, John. Two topics for you. And one, just bear with me. I'm trying to get some clarity on something that my colleagues have tried to follow up on as well. You've said that the president stands by his tweets Saturday morning. The President Obama ordered this wiretap. You've also said that the administration wants Congress. And let me just be clear. He said he found out this information. You've also said that the president wants Congress to investigate. Some members of Congress, by the way, have asked the White House and asked the president to come forward with that information. So bottom line, why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
I think there's a separation of powers aspect here, as I mentioned to Jonathan, that we think it's...
Talk about resources and time. Why waste that?
Well, it's not a question of waste it. It's a question of appropriateness.
But if the president has the info, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. If he's sitting on this information that he found out, he's now directing or asking or recommending that the intelligence committees look into this. And you talked about they have resources and staff, which they do.
Right.
But why expend those resources and staff if the president found out this information and hasn't?
I think there's a difference between directing the Department of Justice, which may be involved in an ongoing investigation, and asking Congress as a separate body to look into something and add credibility to the look adds an element that wouldn't necessarily be there if we were directing the Department of Justice, for example. But again, I think we've made it very clear how he wants this done and where we go from there. So,
second question then. Millions of Americans are working on their tax returns right now. Will the president commit to releasing his tax returns for this year, and is he still under audit for his past returns?
my understanding is he's still under audit, and I'll follow up on the question. Yeah.
Who cares?
Question and quick follow-up.
It's not legally required anyway.
How do you react? How do you understand what we've seen on the growing number of cases at the Canadian border of Canadians born and raised in Canada with valid passport being stopped at the border and told just to go back? They won't let come in the U.S.
I'm not aware of that. I think that's something that probably should be addressed to the Department of Homeland Security.
There might be a misunderstanding of the messages sent.
I don't know, and I think it's a good question that is probably best directed towards the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Swan.
Thank you. Is the White House going to keep its promise to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement? And our understanding is that there's some divisions of opinion. Rex Tillerson wants to stay in. Steve Bannon wants to get out. What's going on? Will you keep the promise? If not, why not?
Yeah, I think that's something I'd be glad to follow up with you and everyone. I don't have anything on that right now.
It's a catch-22. You get out, you have no influence. You stay in.
I'll get back to you, Mike.
You got to deal with all the.
I had an unrelated question, but I also want to follow up on something that Alexis.
Unrelated questions are my favorite.
Had asked. She talked about the communications strategy. Will the president?
The real issue is, are they going to talk about Kellyanne Conway's shoes on the sofa?
Will he speak to the public about it? Will he answer questions about it?
That's a good question. I think that we are going to have a very comprehensive strategy. As I mentioned, just a few minutes from now, the president is going to engage with members of the House whip team to talk to them.
Whip team.
I understand that, but I know
Somebody's going to get
and
whipped.
I understand that. This is step
They need
one.
what they need is a whooping team.
There's a lot of time, as I mentioned. We expect to be dealing with this for the next several weeks. There'll be plenty of opportunities for the president to speak about that, to engage with the public. But it's going to be a comprehensive plan that we will discuss. We had, I can't even begin to tell you how many administration folks, members of Congress, flooding the broadcast and radio airwaves today, both nationally and in local markets. We were very, very active throughout the country, getting out the word on what we're doing and why we're doing it, from national broadcast shows to cable to TV, to radio. We had a very, very aggressive start to this effort. We're working with the House in particular. We'll continue to start really engaging with the Senate. But this is going to be a comprehensive effort working with the House and the Senate to get this thing done, and other partners, doctors and outside groups that share this concern. As I mentioned earlier to one of the other folks, that there is there's a need by companies and corporations who are feeling the weight of additional costs to join us in this effort. And I just want to, this is obviously something that needs to get dealt with. The escalating costs are having a significant impact, not just on our economy, but on the ability of people to get hired. Or frankly, people who are hired lose their job because the cost of healthcare is not allowing, especially people in the small and medium-sized businesses, to keep up with those costs. With that, thank you guys very much. I look forward to seeing you.
Sean, I had a meeting tomorrow. Congressman Cummings is meeting with the president.
We'll have a readout for you.
Sean, I had that unrelated question, which was...
I'm sorry. That's not fair. Mike gets his unrelated question.
Will the Trump...
Answer mine after that, please.
Will the Trump administration continue the Obama administration's practice of releasing publicly the visitor?
We're currently evaluating our procedures in that, and we'll have some, when we have an announcement, I'll let you know. In April, I'll have a readout on our schedule for tomorrow later. I will have, and once it's confirmed, I will let you know first, and then everybody else. Thank you guys, have a great day.
Well, the video portion of the live stream is over, and so it's been an interesting set of circumstances over the past little while. We have this whole issue with the wiretapping. Listening to Rush a little bit earlier today, and just the contrast between some commentators has been really interesting. We've got you can just tell who has a bent or that they're not objective, and that's fine for a person who's a commentator, because they can have an opinion, and you get their opinion. You're going to get my opinions here on this show as well, but my opinions I try to keep directed towards the commentators and not just the news itself. So it's just interesting, the balance that I see out there. If they approach the subject or the issue with I'm just going to call it an implicit bias. They already come to the table subjective, with a subjective opinion. They don't have the ability to pull themselves back and actually look at something objectively. That's an interesting rose-colored glasses kind of, or tinted glasses kind of way of approaching a subject, and it's kind of troublesome in some ways. The thing that bothers me most about that is that they will follow a certain narrative, and then they continue to promote that narrative, and that can be kind of dangerous. But I just want to say I appreciate you guys that are leaving comments. I greatly appreciate that, and I know that's kind of part of what makes the show work. So whether you're listening to me I'm trying to bounce back and forth between YouTube and Facebook, but I do appreciate people making comments, and I'm not sure if the comments show up on the news feed or not, because there's a thing where I can pin the comment, and I need to look into that, because if I pin your comment, does that mean it's visible to everyone? Or if I don't pin it, what does that do? I'm not sure. Hopefully that people can see your comments when you post. I guess I'll have to look at that and see what that means, because I wasn't aware of that before. So maybe people have been making comments and I've been pinning them, and that's not, nobody can see them. Sorry. But anyway, yeah, I appreciate your comments. And of course, with YouTube, it's pretty easy. Everybody obviously sees that. And if you want to see me on YouTube, if you're on Facebook and you want to see me on YouTube, it is simply TNA to me with the number 2, TNA number 2, and then me, M-E. That's at YouTube, and I believe you will find that at just youtube.com/TNA to me, I think. Facebook, on the other hand, is also kind of like that. It's if you're on YouTube and you want to watch me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/thenewsaccordingtome, and it's all spelled in words. It's all one word. There's no numbers in there. So it's just / the news according to me. I probably should put that up there on the screen. I'll make a little thing later. You guys can watch that. Now this whole thing with the wiretapping is really interesting. It's a tangled up mess, and maybe Trump did this on purpose. Maybe he just he's one of those people who just speaks his mind, and it happens to do something that nobody was expecting. All the stuff coming at him from the left, which in my opinion is destroying the Democrat Party. Bernie supporters seem to be the most realistic in this whole process. They see the DNC as being corrupt. They see it as being a very, just deceptive, deceitful organization. And like H.A. Goodman, he just, I don't agree with his politics. He's a left-wing socialist. I don't agree with his politics. But I do agree with the truth that he talks about the DNC and about things that are happening with Trump and why the country's where it's at and why the DNC is where it's at. However, I do believe the DNC is falling apart. It's coming apart at the seams, and I don't think they're ready to recognize that. The media is trying to continue to drive this narrative that will hopefully, they're hoping that rallies the troops and they can get their base in line and really come back because they have a common enemy. That's what they're trying to, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're trying to get the Bernie people back. They're trying to get the DNC people who are disenfranchised back because they're trying to make Trump into such an enemy that they can possibly create this monster that everyone can rally around to, I guess that's the only way I can really describe it at this point. However, that's failing miserably. You can't just play the boogeyman card all the time, and then of course the Russians are coming, and every time they try to do that, they find out that there's pictures. I mean, just like this whole thing with Ben Carson. Now there's another, I'll have a video out later, but this whole thing with Ben Carson about him calling slaves immigrants. That's not exactly what he was talking about. If you look at the context of what he was saying, it's understandable. Nobody gasped when he said that in the room, but they're playing this video, and of course everybody's reacting to that because it's just what they do. They get triggered by those kinds of things. And then come to find out, Obama made a very similar statement to what Ben Carson made. Not exactly, but very similar. And he clarified himself a little bit better. He was very careful about walking around the landmine about calling slaves, the slave trade, immigrants. I don't think Ben did quite as good of a job articulating the specifics of that. No matter how you get here, whether you're a refugee, whether you're a slave, whether you're an indentured servant like my family was, we got kidnapped and brought here and got sold into indentured servitude. That's the history of my family getting here. But yet they're all immigrants. Okay, that's an immigration thing. You're not willingly immigrating, but you're immigrating. So that's a part of that. Regardless of how that happens, it's still at the baseline, it's considered immigration. So I kind of get where he's coming from with that. Now, let's get back to the wiretapping thing. At first, okay, now if you go back to the election, and I've got video of this, right before the election and right during the election, Obama's saying, because Trump was saying that the election's rigged. The election could be rigged. So his response was, there's no rigging, there's no rigging. Well, this is during the time that they're trying to go after Trump for they're trying to get something on Trump to try to discredit him and try to slam dunk the election that they thought they were already going to win, because there was a 91% chance, or like 90, it was almost 90, I think it was 92%, that when I was watching CBS that night, they had this guy off to the side, and he kept predicting the odds. Odds were 92%. That Hillary was going to win. The betting odds, they kind of had an odds person there, like a bookie. And they kept going to this guy, and of course, as the night went on, and of course then Trump, won the states that they knew he was going to win. Well, all those people are racist in Kentucky anyway, so they won that. Oh yeah, I won Indiana. Those people are all racist. So the states that they knew were going to be red, but they expected the rest of the map basically to light up blue. Well, then Florida, and North Carolina, which was in contention as well, but they really thought they were going to win that because the polls were saying they were still going to win it. And then they lost those two. When he got Florida, there was kind of a little bit more nervousness in the room, and they went over to the bookie, and he said 78%. So a 78% chance. Does Trump still have a viable path to victory? They kept saying, does he even have a path to victory? Because it was such a slim chance that he couldn't make it. Okay, I'm sorry. I just find it funny when the media has egg on their face because of the false narratives that they always do. I'm going to start going over headlines. I'm going to have like a little segment where I just do headlines because it's so obvious the way they frame the headlines. I saw one this morning, said, small majority of people were being polled about Syrian refugees, but a small majority believes. In other words, 52% of Americans believe that we should limit that refugees. The benefits of bringing refugees here outweigh the possible risks. That was the poll. I'm not saying that's my opinion. I'm saying that was the poll. My opinion of the headline was that's called fake news. If you just came out and said 52%, if the headline would have read 52% of Americans believe that the risks outweigh the benefits of Syrian refugees. That's one thing. But to come out and say small majority, it's still a majority. And to get 52% majority in this country on anything nowadays, because we are so divided, I mean, the other 48%, probably 15 to 20% of them had no opinion. If they were forced to an opinion, you might split those. So now you got 62%. And then there's another 10% or 15%, whatever's left there, who's somewhat opposed, and the rest of them are vehemently opposed. It might be like 5% of them that are vehemently opposed, that would say that the benefits are far. And so you have to kind of watch those kinds of things because they like to frame things with adjectives a lot that are not true. I mean, it's like every time they introduce, for instance, the guy who does the Veritas stuff, and I can never think of his name when I think about him, Veritas Project. They always say, discredit a journalist. They always put that in front of his name. Sorry, I bumped the microphone. They always put that in front of his name. Drives me nuts. That is fake news. Okay, to do that all the time is fake news. To say this guy who does this, who was once such and such, or did such and such a thing, okay, that's sort of, but you're still qualifying the guy. You're still quantifying him within your little box with your little adjectives that you want to add on to, the pronouns or whatever you want to call him. I don't know. I'm not an English major, obviously. I not talk funny. So there you go. That's the news according to me. Obviously, I think what I might be doing is every day I might be coming on and doing a little bit of a commentary on the press conference. Press conference comes out every day, and hopefully I can, if this works, I may start, obviously the technology seems to be working. I'm not sure. I don't see any red flags in terms of the YouTube cutting me off. So maybe I can get away with this. It seems like every time I try to promote anything, I get cut off or they don't allow my feed for some reason. I can just show a picture or play some music that's like open source. I can even write my own music, but if it sounds like something else, you're done. So that's all I've got for right now. We're going to go ahead and sign off. I'm not going to play any music because every time I do, they say my music is bad or something. I don't know. So we've been on here long enough. We've been actually streaming now for too long, probably. Yeah, that's probably what it is. Probably too long. So go ahead and turn that off, and we're going to come back probably, hopefully tomorrow, and we're going to start having shows more often. We may be having a morning show and an afternoon show for the live press conference. So The morning show will be pretty early, and it'll be basically based on things that have happened the previous day, in my opinion, of kind of what the reporting was the day before. And then we'll kind of roll into the day with whatever happens. So there you go. Haven't really defined the show format too well yet, but just kind of working with the technology, and any suggestions you guys might have. It's just been kind of fun to play with the streaming technology. I use vMix for that, getting that kind of up and rolling, and trying to work on how one guy, one PC can do all this. So that's all I'm going to do, and we'll go ahead and sign out. I'm not going to play, like I said, I'm not going to play any music. I am just going to figure out which button gets me to the newsroom, which I think is this one. No, that was not working. How about that's not going to work. Twitter, that was a color, lower third, studio cam back. Let's try this one. Oh, there we go. So there you go. Back to the studio, and we'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow. That's all for me, Kevin Blankenberg, signing off.